Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Doomer Optimism podcast. I'm hosting today. This is Trace Crow. This is a special audio-only episode with the now infamous William Wheelwright. Thank you so much for joining me today, William.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be back.
Yes. Third time is a charm. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the madness of modernity today. But I wanted to start with, you recently had, or relatively recently had, a thread that just totally blew up. And I wanted to kind of ask you about what was that like being at the I guess the eye of the hurricane throughout that process?
Yeah, it was it was pretty funny. This was about a month ago now. We've been trying to we wanted to do this immediately after, but scheduling on both ends has delayed it till now. But yeah, it was just a thread about very much off the cuff. Some of my threads I write out in advance. Some of them I just have random thoughts and I put them out there and see what happens. And this was one of the latter types where I just a random thought popped into my head kind of late at night, right before I was about to go to bed, and it was just, I'd heard this little stat, something along the lines of like, if 1 in 4 American households kept 10 chickens, laying hens for eggs, there would be no egg industry. That would be the equivalent of how many laying hens there are in the industrial, egg production industry. And so I took that and I sort of changed the arithmetic a little bit. I made it 1 in 10, and it turned out that the number for one, if it were 1 in 10 households, would be 35 chickens. And if you do the math for the amount of vegetable acreage, it would be a half acre, which actually, like intensive kind of organic high rotation production is actually a lot more productive per square foot. So it would actually probably be a lot less than a half acre in order to equal the total vegetable production in the US. But I digress. And then I did that also with pigs, which I know is a little bit crazier, and then also dairy cows, which is also arguably even more of a crazy thing than that. And all it was a thought experiment. I wasn't saying anyone should do this or it would be good, or even that it would be good, even though I do think people should and that it would be good. But all it was just stating the statistics, basic, just arithmetic, just to give people a sense of the scale and the distribution and the concentration. And for the first 12 or 24 hours or so, it was all very friendly. It was all my mutuals who were all, fellow homesteaders and farmers, or at least enthusiastic about that kind of thing. That's kind of my personality on Twitter, is all about this stuff, which is great. And then maybe about a day into it, it just, all hell broke loose, and suddenly all these blue checks found it and were, trying to dunk on it, were quote tweeting it in all sorts of ways. And it was fun. I mean, I thought it was hilarious the whole time. I never imagine, you sort of imagine that the threads that you plan out and think hard about are going to be the ones that go viral, not the ones that you just are off the cuff, like this one was. And it was, it was just wild it was just a very innocuous, basic, non-confrontational idea compared with some of the other things I post, which I admittedly are more controversial. And it produced the most unbelievable, as they say on Twitter, cope and seethe from these blue check types, these sort of urbanites. Not that there's anything wrong with urbanites, but these, these people that I guess are in like the sort of media / intelligentsia class, who just apparently have something against like families raising small livestock and gardening for themselves. I don't understand. Basically, I've been trying to write about it. I've been trying to write something about it since then, and it's been taking me a long time because I want to be precise about it. But my ultimate take on the whole thing is that there's a lot of like buzzwords that get thrown around in terms of what are the, I guess, like values of the regime, or like Washington or whatever. But I think above any of those buzzwords is really just like this, is really just leisure. That's like kind of seemingly, at least my take from this experience, is that really the thing that they're prioritizing above anything else, whether it's, equality or human rights or anything like that, is just the future of a workless future, a future without toil, I suppose you could say, generously. And I think that, I just think these people had never imagined themselves doing like manual labor, and the very thought, the very suggestion that might be something, might be a good thing, which I wasn't even, in the words of what I posted, wasn't even suggesting, but that's what they extrapolated from it. And I mean, I do think that, but so I can understand how you would extrapolate that, but the actual text of my post didn't say anything, didn't make a value judgment on these things.
Mhm.
And and I think, it's just interesting that, I think ultimately what triggered them was, yeah, just this idea that manual labor can be, a good reward. Voluntary manual labor can be a good rewarding thing, not just in that it produces tangible, goods that can be, enjoyed and consumed in a family setting, or otherwise, but that it has, a spiritual benefit too, which I think, basically everyone on our side of Twitter, left and right, uh, agrees with, and feels, either, intuitively in their hearts or from their direct experience. And so we're very much, people talk about realignment a lot these days, and it definitely, this whole experience, to culminate and to answer your question, really informed my perception of what exactly is going on in America and in the West, in terms of like the way that society is, I guess, in the quote unquote post-Trump era, and in other, in other terms as well, is sort of realigning itself, and dividing itself into factions, which everyone is desperate to figure out exactly, or to define, how those factions are arrayed. But I think this is one of them. It's just basically people who think that, one way you can divide people. There are two types of people, and one of them thinks gardening in your backyard is a good thing, and the other doesn't.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that was fascinating for me was, usually, like, the kind of old saw about Twitter is like, every day there's that person on Twitter, and the goal is to not be that person.
Yeah.
And this was the first time that I, knew who was that person, and I 100% agreed with them, right? Like, I didn't understand like the kerfuffle in any way, shape, or I mean, I did. I came to many of the same conclusions, and being, a left, you know, urbanist, like I'm in an urban area, like the blue area in a red state. I'm from Michigan, I'm college educated. I've got all the, the class signifiers, right, of urban liberal, right? I get where they're coming from. I know why they attacked you. I just don't agree with them anymore. I've been so thoroughly, I don't need, I like to call it green pilled, of just like, I think
That's good. I
like
haven't heard that before.
we need to bring the farm, and nature needs to come into the city, that like a lot of the things we were so afraid of, it's like in the late Victorian period, right? The cities were really disgusting, mainly because sanitation was terrible, but also because there was like a very uh awful, social Darwinism, in which the poor were just left to just die. Like, they didn't care about them. They didn't have proper sanitation. They were drug addicted, and like just craziness was happening, right? And so the cities got this reputation for being dirty, and they came in and they just scrubbed them clean, right? And then when the modernist movement and then the postmodern architecture movement came in, it just is like, it's just it's like a dentist's office, right? Everywhere's just a dentist's office. It's just cement, with, and if you have any greenery, it's like these, it's like bonsai without the spirit, right? It's just like, we're gonna have these beautifully manicured trees, or now, you get in areas that are struggling, you have, it's just weed choked, broken cement, um metal fences, half coming down or covered with razor wire. And it's just the whole architecture of modern cities is like just absolute madness, right? And so I'm looking at it and saying, well, we need to bring that, nature needs to be in the city. There should be nowhere that is devoid of nature. There should be nowhere that's devoid of farming in some capacity. And in many respects, I found what you wrote to be like eminently reasonable. Even though you're right, it really had no there was no judgment in there, right? You weren't making a subjective call. You were just simply saying, if we did X, Y would occur, right? But it was a really beautiful thought. Now you expanded on that later, or kind of tangentially with your what I guess you could call your ice cream thread, where you kind of walked people through a slightly more precise vision of how that might play out, of that kind of mentality might play out. Specifically, your vision seemed to be very tied to the Great Plains, it seemed to me. Would you kind of talk about that a little bit? Because I found that to be a very fascinating vision of a sort of I don't know, like a retro techno future kind of thing, right? Where it's like, it's the future, it's definitively the future, but it's borrowing a lot of things from the past.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I can. So just to give everyone the background. So my idea, my thread on why ice cream should be the national food of America, and I had an article in IM 1776 about this as well. Basically, my take is that so we should have a 3-ingredient ice cream that we should be striving to produce en masse, and those 3 ingredients should be raw duck eggs, raw 100% grass-fed dairy. It can be cow's milk or goat's milk or sheep's milk or whatever, and then either raw honey. I said raw honey at the time, but we can also include maple syrup. It would be an alternative in certain areas. And so, and the reason that I think my starting point for this idea is that in any agricultural system, there are 2 primary limitations. The first is sunlight, obviously, but in most of the world, that's not really a big problem. The sun shines for enough of the year that you can harvest some sort of yield. It becomes challenging at extremely high north and high south latitudes, northern Scandinavia, southern Patagonia, etc. But in most of the world, you can grow. There's enough sunlight, especially because even in those northern latitudes, you get these super long days in the summer. So there's enough photon activity coming down that enough photosynthesis can happen that you can synthesize sugars and grow calories, basically. And so basically everywhere in the world has enough sunlight. And then the second limiting factor is rainfall, is just water. And so it follows that the effective and efficient and intelligently managed agricultural system makes the most of these 2 freely given gifts. And because everything else after that is an expense. But sunshine and rainfall come for free. And basically what's going on in America right now is that we squander the vast majority of both of those resources. And so for rainfall, a quick solution would be to build on, through government funding on a New Deal type scale, to build earthen dam ponds in valleys high in the landscape of all across the continent. And what that would do is these dams would collect rainfall and snow melt, and it would hold water high in the landscape where it can be gravity fed to lower areas, just for longer. It doesn't disrupt the hydrological cycle. it just slows it down slightly, because the water all water eventually flows to the sea. All we would be doing is stopping it briefly and using it to our benefit, rather than having it just run off, which is what happens now in most of America, because we've depleted our soils of carbon, which is, carbonaceous organic compounds are what actually grab onto things, namely water and nitrogen and other nutrients. And that's why they're the building blocks of all life. And so once we've got these ponds, let's say we built a couple million ponds. We had government funding to hire earth moving contractors in the Rockies and in other areas, especially drier areas, where there's a lot of intense water politics, by the way. So this would be like a Caesarean level intervention, just warning you. But if we could do this, we could hold water high in the landscape, and we could gravity feed it down to lower areas. But then, it's not but because water is the foundation of all life on Earth, we biology would just proliferate in these ponds, just as it does anywhere else. Frogs, tadpoles, other amphibians. You could have fish in them. I mean, they would be irrigation ponds, so the water levels would be fluctuating a lot. So aquaculture, i.e., the growing of fish for food, would be challenging, but it presumably could be done in some way. But what wouldn't be as challenging is, you could raise waterfowl on these ponds, and you could have an entire industry of duck eggs, being produced on these ponds that are also being used to irrigate, downhill pasture lands. And just the difference that irrigation makes to pasture is like insane. I mean, I was on a Twitter space recently with a guy from Colorado who, I never actually heard this specific statistic, but I was asking him, he's got some of his farm is irrigated pasture and some of it is just dry land. And his ratio of cows to acre on the irrigated pasture is 3-1. And on the dry land, it's 15-1. So if we could, and that's just a question of slowing down the rainfall and using it. Enough rain falls everywhere on Earth, including in deserts, to grow grass, and to grow grass prodigiously. But the problem is that most of it either runs off because we don't have enough soil infiltration capacity, or it evaporates immediately following the rain event. Mm-hmm. And so it's just a question of all agriculture is really just a question of first making rainfall effective. In other words, making it so that it will be taken up by plants, rather than evaporated or run off into the local watershed. Anyway, so ponds are a sort of quick fix to make this easier. And you can actually harvest a yield from ponds in the form of duck eggs. So that's the first ingredient of the ice cream. The second ingredient then is easier to explain, which is that now that we have these irrigated pastures, we can we can run dairy cows on them, 100% grass-fed dairy cows. And so, this is being done by people. Grass-fed dairy is even rarer than truly grass-fed and grass-finished beef, because it's just very difficult to get the under kind of conventional management. It's very difficult to get the required nutrients, calcium, et cetera, to produce milk. But it is possible with really good pasture management, and so that would have to be adopted, and it's not difficult. I mean, I practice it here on my farm. It's just it's really just a mindset shift that needs to take place, in terms of, instead of thinking about yourself as a cattle farmer, or a cowboy, you just have to think of yourself as a grass farmer or a soil farmer. And once you make that mental shift, it just becomes basic logic to manage your cows in a better way. And anyway, so the reason that I advocate for dairy, I know that that's controversial diet-wise, but just in terms of raw production, it's by far the most efficient, grass-based calorie production that we have. I mean, for instance, let's see if I can remember these numbers exactly, but a gallon of whole milk is like 200, is about 2,000 calories, I think, and you get the same from 2 pounds of 80% lean, 20% fat grass-fed beef.
Mhm.
Um, but in order to like produce, you know, that many calories per day, for example, if your goal was to produce 20,000 calories per citizen per day, for example, you know, not that I'm in favor of like mandating any of this or whatever, but just hypothetically, you would have to have, uh, I ran the numbers on this, but I can't explain specifically how it works out right now because I don't have it in front of me. But you would have to have like 900 million beef cows
Mhm.
in order to produce that. So that's not realistic. But you would only have to have you know 40 or 50 million dairy cows in order to produce that.
Mm.
So in terms of just calories and in terms of, you know, providing a like just a caloric basis for the population, but also a nutrition basis for the population, dairy is really the best option that we have, in my opinion, especially from grass, which most of America is grassland. So you have to figure
Mhm.
out a way, if you want to have like a sustainable agricultural system, you've got to figure out a way to convert the grass into calories for humans, and dairy is the best way to do that. Especially and now that we have irrigated pastures, it becomes a lot more possible because we're slowing and sinking and spreading the rainfall, the permaculture concept. But
Yeah.
and then finally, so now we have a lot of dairy, a lot of milk, and finally, you know, in these pastures will be a lot of flowering plants, including, you know, white clovers, red clovers, but then a lot of other things too. And and we could be you know, having a national apiarist revival and producing lots of honey as well from these from all of this nectary and this bee habitat. Um, and so those are I know a little bit less about the honey, but you know, I think by turning the you know, the American plains in my grand vision back into a thriving grassland, a lot of the problems that the bees are currently suffering from would go away, just because a lot of the problems that the bees are suffering from are just man-made, you know, stressors that are, you know, chemical or other the ways that we manage them, et cetera. We ship them around the country and stuff like that. But
Mhm.
you know, just those three ingredients are, you can just by doing these sort of changes in water management and changes in livestock management, you can you can just drastically increase the national agricultural productivity and create, you know, a fun product that is actually like basically a health food, like this ice cream idea. Obviously it's just fun to imagine it as ice cream because everybody loves ice cream, but it's like not even a joke because like those three ingredients are all insanely good for you, especially when they're raw. And yeah so you know, I the point of the thread, to conclude, and I know I've been rambling for a long time here, but the point of the thread is just to get people to imagine like a better system than what we have. I mean, I just a lot of my um a lot of my threads come from kind of a place of, hopefully I portray like a positive vision, but they come from kind of a place of lament of what I see around me in agricultural areas and what I read about in other parts of the country, just in terms of the system really just isn't working. It's not working for farmers. It's not working for the consumers. You know, we've got health crises of all different sorts. It works for very few people. It works for very few parts of the supply chain, and it really needs to be reformed. And how to reform it is obviously a much bigger question. But you know, getting people thinking about that and thinking about positive, kind of exciting solutions is really is my bag. So that was the idea of the thread.
Yeah, I mean, it really resonated with me because, I mean, for one thing, you like, I mean, just from a narrative standpoint, like I'm a writer by trade, so like the way you narrativized, you're like, I'm going to tell you how to save America with 3 ingredient ice cream, you know, and it like it was a great narrative device, but it also like, I mean, it was a masterclass in applying permaculture principles, right? I mean, talk about stacking functions.
Mhm.
Every aspect of that was utilizing the natural abundance of the world in like the most like efficient way possible, right? I mean, in passive ways, right? You really
Right.
didn't stray very far away from like basically like Newtonian physics, right? It's just like gravity,
Mhm.
sunlight, water. Like it was all these like very basic things, right? You're
Yeah.
not having to manipulate anything beyond, raising dirt, right? I
Mhm.
mean, that's
Mhm.
about the only thing you're manipulating here.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, the earth moving, which is just a one-time intervention, right? It's like
exactly.
you build those ponds and they're just there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which is
totally.
how ponds get created in the first place. It just takes hundreds of thousands of years or sometimes millions of years, right? They're
Right.
these depressions that
Exactly.
get created over time.
Yep.
And the last thing that I thought was so fascinating about is like that would be a really amazing national food, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Like just be like, because it can be really localized, right? Like you could make it with like elderberry syrup or
totally.
maple syrup
Yep.
or peaches, right?
Yeah.
Peach
Yeah.
juice, like
Yeah.
find a sweetener in your area, and
Hmm.
then and bam, you got it, right?
I love that.
um
Yeah.
and I just thought it was really beautiful. I really did. And the other thing that, or kind of the last thing that kind of resonated with me, is your depiction at the end of it. Probably the most like kind of speculative fiction version of it, right, was the
Hmm. Hmm.
cowboys and the monks,
Yeah.
taking care of the bees.
Yeah.
I just thought it was like, oh my gosh, it was like, this is such a beautiful vision.
Hmm.
In a way, like, again, like narratively, it's beautiful because like cowboys and monks are like very similar in our consciousness, and like the like
Hmm.
this the cultural consciousness of like these monkish people who are dedicated to stewardship,
Hmm.
right,
Hmm.
of the natural world. And I thought that was a really beautiful vision. And it also dovetails in many ways with like the vision of the work that I'm doing with Roots Down, because
Hmm.
we are, we envision trying to change the way that public land is used, especially in urban environments. So, in any given area, right, the county or city government are going to be the largest single landowner generally,
Hmm.
right? And yet that land is like just abused, right? It's just mown and blown. It's
Yep.
usually monocropped lawn, maybe some juniper bushes or some other like, non-native ornamentals, right?
Hmm.
Very
Hmm.
water intensive. And it's like you couldn't come up with, if you were trying to destroy the soil, you couldn't come up with a more efficient way to do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing lives there. And
Hmm.
so our idea is just that like we should be converting that into food, either for animals or for people.
Hmm.
And but what kind of the thing that like makes it all tick is having this kind of class of workers. We just call them growers just in our system, but like a class of workers, people who are paid for their service, not for their product, right?
Hmm.
So they're
Hmm.
farmers, they are farming the land, but they're doing it for the benefit of everybody.
Hmm.
And they're not under that pressure to have to sell the produce, right?
Hmm.
Because they're getting paid regardless.
Hmm.
And there's something about it, like when the way our CEO Jamie talks about it, it like very much like it was like an urbanist vision of your monks, right?
Hmm.
Like a
Hmm.
group of people who are just dedicated to taking care of this land for everybody.
Hmm.
And it just really resonated with me. I thought it was a really beautiful vision,
Yeah.
the future. So to kind of pivot to a very horrific vision of the future, let's talk octopus farming.
Yeah.
You and I both saw that. I didn't comment on it because I was so horrified I about dropped my phone. But I mean, this is just evil, right? I mean, it's just pure, just it's just ridiculous. I mean, we know now that these are incredibly, sentient, intelligent beings,
Mhm.
and the idea that we're going to farm them is
Mhm.
like is just truly bizarre.
Yeah, and just yeah, like there's that mystery with the octopuses, like 10,000 leagues under the sea,
Mm-hmm.
or the octopods in general, including I guess the squid have 10, but I think they're still octopods somehow. Anyway, like yeah, it just seems like a particularly bad idea as I posted. But yeah, I think to connect it to what you were just saying. Sorry for those people who don't know, there was just a very creepy Twitter video the other day, maybe yesterday, that was basically bragging kind of in a techno optimist type way about oh, we're gonna, like, the demand for calamari is through the roof, so we're gonna start farming octopuses now, which has never been done before.
Mhm.
And it just has these videos of obviously these octopuses or octopi, whatever you call them, are such they're so beautiful and alien at the same time, and just
Mhm.
very kind of unsettling because they're so different from us, but somehow they're still like obviously an earthly creature, and you have a kind of respect for them, I think, through those two very um, distant attributes from each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just something, they're not like fish. Okay, like it's not like farming salmon, which is also bad. But like it's just or okay, here's what I was going to say earlier, which is to connect it to this monastic idea that you were delving into with Roots Down. Um, I think the sort of abstract concept there is really just self-limitation
Mhm.
in a sense. And just saying, all right, this is what I'm doing, this is my lot, this is you know and lot kind of has a double entendre here, because it's about land also, but also like my lot in terms of my fortune in life, and what is sort of allotted to me. And um and I'm not gonna, like, I'm going to do the best I can with this, and I'm going to establish borders around what my goals are. And I think that I wrote about this in my mini manifesto for the Jimmer Optimist Substack, um, which is just that there's this idea in modernity, a sort of a very modern idea that um, we have to like have our adventures need to take place in space. So we need to be going out into the world and breaking down all those barriers and transgressing all of those borders. And we certainly shouldn't be imposing them on ourselves. And they're imposed on us by forces of ill will, and we need to break them down. And I understand where that idea comes from and empathize with it to a degree. But I think that on the other hand, what it has created is it has distracted us from. And also, I should say that I think that there's a role for certain types of people to be that sort of explorer or adventurer or crusader. Not necessarily in literal physical space, but to sort of venture out into the unknown, whatever that means. But there's another way of adventuring, and that is to put down roots and to get deep into one spot and to establish borders around themselves. And I actually think that the vast majority of people are much more suited towards that type of towards that source of enrichment and fulfillment in life, because, well, it actually just is richer. I mean, that's this notion of just building kind of a fence and saying, this is my area, I'm gonna make it as beautiful as I can.
Mhm.
um that's really the sort of abstract underlying ethos behind I think what everybody in this homesteading movement agrees on. That like we've had enough with like this sort of amorphous blob approach to life, where we just sort of spill out and never actually establish ourselves in any way. And so to connect it to the octopuses, it's like surely they're like where are we gonna draw the line to say, all right, maybe that's something we just shouldn't farm.
Yeah.
Like, where do we say? And it's a similar thing with like GMOs, which I'm opposed to. um like, shouldn't we, the reason that I'm opposed to them isn't for any like downstream reason, which obviously there are a lot of downstream reasons, but the real reason is just like, we shouldn't do that. We should have a limit on ourselves that says, let's not tamper with the genetics of living beings. How about that? Like, and these where do these kind of rules come from? That's a more difficult question, and how do we agree on them? But um I think what we can agree on is that there should, we need limits. We need to impose limits on ourselves, in order to engender creativity, in order to uh, a lot of what anarcho-contrarian talks about, in order to engender the tendency to put down roots and become established in a place, and kind of revitalize localism and locality, um, and the sort of the abstract idea that's working against us in all these things that we're passionate about and we want to bring about in the world, is this notion of like limitlessness, and the sort of this idea that limits are wrong somehow.
Mhm.
And I think that obviously limits can be overbearing and constricting, and they have been at certain times in history. But that doesn't mean that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater, because in at the end of the day, in a sort of inverse way, having no limits at all can be just as paralyzing. So,
Yeah. No,
well, sorry, just to connect
yeah.
it back to the octopus thing, um, like it, what I would suggest is we put a limit on ourselves in that one little domain, and just say, let's not farm octopuses. Not because we're worried that they might like rapidly evolve and become like a freaky I don't know, like Godzilla like octopus creature, which obviously is a concern, but just because there are we should start thinking about things like there are certain things that surely we shouldn't do, and I just don't think we think in terms of should as much as we should anymore. And the octopus thing is an example of that. It's like, what's the upside and what are the downsides? The upside is more calamari, but the downsides are, the torturing of like untold numbers of highly intelligent, highly sentient beings, that have never been domesticated before, that just for purely for the purposes of slaughter and consumption. And I just I personally just can't abide that. I just think that's like that way lies damnation in a lot of different iterations in the modern world. So yeah.
Yeah, I think, the limits are going to be applied one way or another,
Hmm.
right? And I think that, like, I mean, I think this is John Michael Greer. I may be wrong about this, but the idea of, like, or whoever, maybe you've heard this, like, collapse now and avoid the rush,
Hmm.
and I think, like, there's an aspect of that to it, of just like the science on this, right? Our awareness of the sentience and intelligence of other creatures has become to the point where we surely should be rethinking this in
Hmm.
general, like just the
Hmm.
way that we farm in general. And I think that one of the beautiful things you talked about, and do consistently talk about pasture, and you grass feeding cows. I mean, you said it today about being, you're a grass farmer who
Hmm.
happens to have cows. You know what I mean? And I
Yeah.
think that, like, um, I think that we really need to be rethinking a lot of that. The way we treat trees and plants and just land in general. I mean, it's a very uh like, it's just very hubristic, like we're just filled with this sense of entitlement, um that is already biting us in the ass, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
kind of, I wrote down, you had retweeted someone saying they're a climate change agnostic,
Right.
but you don't even need to believe in climate change to know that we're totally screwing up the planet, right?
Yeah. Which has
um
always been, I've been all over the map on climate change, but I've sort of settled on that just because, yeah, like I think, um, regardless of the degree to which you think it's a problem or an impending catastrophe, surely we can all agree that, coal plants and their slurry ponds are hideous and shouldn't be part of our societal vision for the future.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and so, but what's really ugly is just our consumption.
Mhm.
And I know I'll lose people here, but um, anyway, you keep going. I'll
I
come
don't know
back.
if you're going to lose that many doomer optimists
Yeah, probably not doing
comes to
optimist,
that
but
point. I
if
mean,
some normies come on that somehow find this, they may turn it off at this point. Anyway,
well,
keep going.
I was joking with Ashley and Jason today about how like the best marketing plan we could have is just to keep putting out the podcast, because the real world is doing a darn good job of marketing for Doomer Optimism on our
Yep.
behalf.
Yeah.
But the octopus farming, I look at that as I look at just, it's sort of like emblematic of the general problem for me, is that like I look around, and maybe I'm in a very car centric urban area, right? So when I look around now that I am looking through an ecological lens, it's just ecocide everywhere, right? Everywhere I look is just ecocide. Even when people, I just went to this event, just like talking a great deal about the city in the forest. Atlanta calls itself the city in the forest, right? And it's like true to an extent. Whenever you get up high, you see it's like a few, like it's skyscrapers, pockets of skyscrapers coming out of this like what looks like a dense blanket of trees, right?
Mhm.
But when you get on the ground level, like these are just degraded, like just they're just hideous, degraded versions of what once was a continental wide forest, right?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
this was once a great wild place, and now it's like we've had these pockets in between gas stations, like maybe an acre of a few trees, and the only thing that can live there are squirrels, raccoons, and hawks, right? Maybe a few
Yeah.
owls, right? And this
Yeah.
you used to have 450 species of plants and animals would live per like quarter acre, right? Would have a habitat on this space. And now you've got like this one limited line of a food web, a food,
Right.
triangle. And it's just like I see it everywhere now, and so when I see the octopus farming, for me it's like this is just one more thing. We're taking this creature, we don't even understand probably 2% of what this creature is capable of, or what it feels or understands about life or the world, and we're just going to imprison them so that we
Yeah.
can eat them in the most like industrial mechanistic way. It's just absolutely hideous. It's just a hideous way of being, and the modern world just seems very like just absolutely determined to boil everything down to a spreadsheet and
Mhm.
like the most mechanistic industrial way of doing everything. And you increasingly see this with human relations, um,
Yeah.
is that we're treating people that way. And now I mean, obviously there's a plenty of a long social history of treating certain groups that way.
Mhm.
But just the the way the city is structured, the way capitalist society is structured now, it seems very determined to boil everything down to a spreadsheet.
Mhm.
And if it can't be measured, then it has no worth.
Yeah.
And it's just, to me, just astoundingly um, ill thought,
Mhm.
ill thought out, and just it's going to be so dangerous. And climate change is just one. It's just one outgrowth of that, the plastic problem, the acidity in the oceans, right?
Mhm.
The degrading of our soils, water runoff, water pollution, and I mean collapsing
Habitat
biodiversity,
loss.
right? These are all like just
Yeah.
absolute, like they're all symptoms of the same problem of overshoot and overconsumption.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, where I am, every late in the summer, every summer, we would get hundreds of monarch butterflies.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're lucky to see a dozen. And that may be in part because of climate change, but I also just think it's because of, we've intensified and ramped up, industrial agriculture, chemical intensivity,
Mm-hmm.
just over the course of my 27 years has gone haywire. But yeah, what I wanted to say, I was going to respond. Joel Salatin has this um, has this refrain that the society that can't honor the pigness of the pig and the cowness of the cow will also not be able to honor the Paulness of Paul and the merriness of Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And so, looking at things as distinct individuals and as you know, and having kind of distinguishing and unique details unto themselves. I get that that's not necessarily a thing with livestock. A lot of sometimes, they obviously they do have unique personalities each one, but for the most part they behave a lot more the same than humans do. Um, but I think,
I
yeah,
wonder what the cows would think about that.
yeah, yeah, they may not
Seem
like
to
that,
act the same.
but yeah, but this this idea that I've written about, that if you want to see the future, just look at what's going on in agriculture.
Mhm.
um or this idea that I've sort of coined, that agriculture precedes culture, um which basically to me just means, um you see like labor, people being forced out of work by advances in technology, um that which is what they're predicting with automation and stuff. Well, that already happened in agriculture like 200 years ago.
Mhm.
You see the ongoing like chemical intensification of um our whatever kind of system, that already happened in agriculture. You see genetic modification, that already happened in agriculture. You see declining rates in fertility and sort of like band-aid solutions to make up for it in the short term. uh that already happened in agriculture.
Mhm.
um there's a lot of things where there's a lot of ways that you can sort of use agriculture as a little bit of a crystal ball. And I think that you hit the nail on the head with, the way that our human relationships are sort of degrading. um it really reminds me of something that I think and write about a lot, which is uh you know and to go back to the octopus thing, like the process of domestication, um really, it and I think anyone who's managed livestock in kind of a non-industrial way will, or even had a dog, I mean,
Mhm.
will understand this, which is that it's really a partnership. And even with livestock that you're raising for meat, there's a trust there. And interestingly, maybe we can talk about slaughter a little bit, because that's something that I did a thread on recently. But one of these ideas that I think is totally alien to the modern mind, and basically impossible for certainly someone who's not exposed or interested in these ideas to wrap their mind around, is um, the notion of loving the animals that you are raising for meat, which I strive to do, and just not even strive to, but just do, because I feel great affection for them, knowing that I will be slaughtering them in the future. And to me, there's just not a contradiction there, because it's a matter of stewardship. And there's a lot of more complex ideas about time and how animals experience the passage of time and what death really means, in that context. And is it's not the same thing. They're not aware of death. They're only aware of pain and stress. And so if you give them a life without pain and stress that ends in intentional death, especially for an animal that is domesticated, that would basically die a slow and painful death, under normal circumstances, if you just let it die of natural causes. There's really nothing immoral about that, in my opinion. What's immoral is raising them in conditions that are cause great stress and cause pain, and obviously slaughtering them in ways that, death is always painful, but in ways that don't minimize, at least make an effort to minimize that. But what I'm trying to say um, is that in our obviously what I just described um, is completely not the way that animals are raised in the modern system. What people find so uncanny about it is that, um, especially for example, chickens are they're really just, even though they're biological beings and entities, they're really kind of pigeonholed, no pun intended, into a like a mechanistic
Mhm.
role in the system. they're really just, and plants are like this too. And plants are sentient beings as well. It's a little bit harder for people to understand that, but anyway, I'll stick to animals for the time being. Where we take these biological entities and sort of force them into a mechanical system, and that's a really disturbing mismatch for people. And I think that's the sort of the way in which that's a real square peg in a trying to be forced into a round hole is, I think, what people find so disturbing about it and so off-putting. um, and but the thing is that in modern agriculture, cows, pigs, and chickens, which are the three main things that we raise, um, they're all domesticated livestock, so that they're not really thought of as like wild creatures. But the
Mhm.
idea of taking an octopus um and essentially or a wild animal, any wild animal, but especially an octopus, because they're so mysterious and we just don't, as you were saying, we just don't know anything about them.
Mhm.
And they're so alien to us, even compared to like avian creatures. They're just so different from us. It's that just like goes beyond the pale, I think, in terms of like just how we how we supplant biology with like kind of techno mechanisms. And I think that's exactly what, in the most dystopian kind of hyper techno optimist visions of the future, you hear about for humans as well.
Mhm.
To get back to the Joel Salatin point that I started with, just that human nature essentially will be replaced with technology. And that's really that there seem to be certain forces out there that are actively trying to bring this about.
Mhm.
Whether that's the metaverse, or which obviously is already a thing and is something that they're promoting and advertising it right now, or like obviously this this gets into hazier territory, but Elon Musk has his like brain implant company that he thinks will
Oh
be
yeah, Neuralink.
uh, Neuralink, yeah, that he thinks will be like live and operating within the decade, and other things like that. um, and there's obviously other kind of less intense forms of it that are, in my opinion, kind of priming people for it. Uh, that, like I said, the pattern is that they're using human derived technology to replace human nature itself. And I think that essentially, whether it's homesteading or any other kind of disposition that you have towards like the world around you, what maybe to go back to my original thread, what what might make us coalesce on one side and maybe other people on another is just people who want to resist that, who want to have their hands in the natural world, in soil, in on trees, and with other human beings, just in physical reality as we've always known it,
Mhm.
versus those who would embrace um, a sort of like technological future that isn't actually real,
Yeah.
in various ways. And so I think a lot of what I try and encourage people to do on Twitter is, in any way you can, just engage with like the material world.
Yeah.
Whether you don't have to be a homesteader. You can and my friend Roxanne, Happy Holistic Homestead, does a great job promoting this as well, which is that you don't need to like be in a rural environment already, and this is great for your urban project. You can like kind of live a homesteader type lifestyle even in a city apartment, because it's not about like actually necessarily growing all your own food or doing anything. It's really just about like resisting kind of the metaverse tendency, in my opinion.
Mhm.
And you do that by just engaging with real things with your hands and your mind, rather than fake manufactured realities that are ultimately sap you of of your human spirit. So anyway, sorry, long tangent, but
No, I mean, I see. This is really beautiful. I mean, one thing the way you're discussing the relationships with animals, right?
Mhm.
Um, I mean, I think that there is a tangent, right? Is that cows are the way they are because of genetic modification, right?
Mhm.
We changed them
Yeah.
over thousands of years, but I do think that there is a time is a very fundamental element in this, right? Is that when humans make decisions generationally, right?
Mhm.
Like we are making this decision over multiple generations,
Mhm.
there's at least more of a human consensus, right?
Mhm.
This is who we are. This is how we're going to do things. But
Mhm.
so much is in the last like 150 years, right? So much changes in a single generation or within a generation
Right.
that we don't have a lot of. There's some major things that have changed that we haven't had the time to process them, to absorb them societally and say, is this right for us? Is this somewhere we want to go?
Mhm.
And I think that we're seeing issues with that, right? I mean, there's things about the world that we're changing now, or have been changing in my lifetime, in the 40 years I've been on this planet,
Mhm.
that worry me, right? Like we've burned more fossil fuels since I've been alive than we did in basically the 200 years previous,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
All like 80, I think something like 85% of the plastic that's been created and is in the world now was created in my lifetime.
Right.
We're not even one, we don't even have one generation of digital natives who are adults yet. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like real adults, like
Right.
like really making it go. But we have absolutely no idea what any of this stuff does. And it's not unique to us. Like it's not unique to like millennials and Zoomers. Like this has been, I would argue, since the advent of like kind of industrial capitalism, fossil fuel capitalism, it's been like one gigantic social experiment after another, in
Mhm.
which we just push and push and push and push and push, and just pretend we don't see the rounding errors, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And the trail of carnage that's followed this path to modern living.
Mhm.
And I think part of that is, um, or a symptom of that, something that you kind of alluded to many times, is about that relationship with animals. Is I think that part of the thing that really bothers people when they see industrial livestock agriculture, like in the flesh, is
Mhm.
that we know deep down animals are, they're us too, right? Like they're a part of this whole web. They are
Mhm.
not separate from us exactly. And when we treat them like that, it's a kind of the sense of like the slippery slope, right? If we are
Mhm.
willing to treat a pig like that, which we know pigs are very intelligent creatures, right? And if we're
Yep.
willing to treat a pig like that, surely we're willing to treat a human like that. And what makes you even more uncomfortable about that is that like the last 200 years especially have shown us multiple times in which people are very willing to treat other humans like that, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not like this thing like, oh yeah, whatever, show me when that's happened. It's like, which decade? Like
Yep.
which decade do you want to point me to when we treated other humans like that?
Yep.
And it's a bizarre kind of, I mean, I personally think like Taylorism is probably one of the worst things that have ever been introduced to the human consciousness. This sense that anything can be measured, you know,
Mhm.
um, and should be measured, and we
Mhm.
should go for maximum efficiency.
Right.
What I like about your worldview is how rigorously inefficient it is in some respects, the kind of
Yeah.
Taylorist view, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet by you applying permaculture principles, you're actually being like magnificently efficient, right?
Right.
With the lowest amount of inputs,
Mhm.
or using the inputs that are given freely to you by God, right?
Mhm.
um, I did want to ask you something. Knowing a bit about your spirituality,
Mhm.
um, do you what is there a resonance in the way that you feel, or the way you treat your animals? Is there, I mean, is there a spirituality in that, I guess,
Mhm.
is no other way to kind of get to it.
Definitely.
Yeah, I found it interesting with you, the way you were describing that, even though these animals were meant to be slaughtered, ultimately you wanted to give them a good life. And I'm kind of thinking, the first thing that thought to me came to my thought was like, well, gosh, that's sort of could be a simplification of God's relationship to man, right? He knows we will be slaughtered. We are all meant to die. And
Mhm.
yet, can I create the circumstance in which people can flourish
Yep.
and live good lives?
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
very. There's definitely a congruence there between that theologians have highlighted between you know our understanding of God is like a dog's understanding of us. You know, but yeah. Well, let me just say real fast before I get onto the spirituality thing, which I'll connect to what I'm about to say, which is that I had a tweet the other day that people enjoyed, that I just randomly Googled again, how many horses were there in 1915? Before, in the years before, or what it happened, that 1915 was the peak of the number of horses in America, and it was 26 million. uh,
Gosh.
and people have like to comment on what you were saying about people's reaction, sort of subliminal reaction to seeing animals being mistreated, and raised in uh, inhumane conditions. um, I think we really underestimate the degree to which not even that long ago, even in urban environments, animals were just a constant part of daily life, between whether it's horses, obviously dogs were companions, but also in rural landscapes would have been working dogs. But then also just just like domesticated livestock, even in urban environments with chickens and pigs and stuff, as sort of diverters of food waste. Which I have a kind of a hot take, not to digress too far, but that we hear about the food waste statistics being 50% or whatever, uh, of all food produced is ultimately thrown out. I'm sure you've heard that.
Mhm.
I have a hot take that that's actually historically normal, especially given that there was no refrigeration in previous times, but that all of that uneaten food would have just been eaten by chickens and pigs, and so it wasn't actually wasted, and it was turned into eggs and charcuterie.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and so there's actually nothing wrong with 50% of the food going uneaten, as long as it actually does go eaten by omnivorous, domesticated animals. um, because and it's obviously just insane. I mean, and on top of that, I don't know if people, if you're concerned about climate change, just the tonnage of food waste that goes into the landfill that it then emits methane,
Mhm.
because it's anaerobically decomposing organic material, which is
Well,
what methane is.
I'd like to
Um,
wonder, like on that point, like when was dog and cat food invented? Because I'm pretty sure dogs and cats were eating food scraps too.
oh, 100%,
How
yeah,
how they
definitely.
were fed. So
Definitely. I mean, cats, I don't think they fed cats at all. They just lived on rodents. That's
yeah,
what cats
and
were for.
birds.
Yeah, and birds, yeah. But and yeah, dogs definitely got bones and meat scraps and stuff. But yeah, and probably some eggs and things like that. But in general, they were also mostly left to fend for themselves, I would imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, so the point is just that animals were everywhere. Animals were an integral part of human life, not just dogs and cats, which obviously, you go to like a city and there's all these like late 20s women with their little chihuahua or whatever. It's a great a telltale sign of sort of like a decadence and decline, in my opinion. But but no offense to anyone who has such a canine, uh, but you probably know what I mean.
Yeah.
um the To go to the spirituality thing, I think you know I um I just all every being on earth is a creature of God. um and so it's really not, as human beings who have reason, who have intellect, whatever it is that you believe distinguishes us from animals, the ability to abstract, maybe, I don't know, language, all these sorts of different theories about what makes human beings distinct, which I think everyone realizes that we are. We're both natural and unnatural in some sense, and uh, it's a perversion of our like place in the hierarchy of our purpose in the world to mistreat not only our fellow human beings, but also the animals here, both wild and domestic.
Mhm.
And I think people just feel that intuitively. Um, it's actually funny that just random thought that just popped into my head, but I was reading about it recently about how one of the supposedly a telltale sign of a a sociopath is like an extreme investment in like animal welfare, emotional investment. So like even people who cannot empathize with their fellow human beings still feel a strong sense that animals deserve respect and dignity, which is it's kind of funny. And like there's this sort of Twitter thing about being an autist or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of Twitter accounts that are just like cute animals and things like that,
Mhm.
or interesting looking animals and all that. And it's really an interesting component of this whole kind of fringe side of Twitter is how people feel about animals and how important that is to them in terms of them being one of the main negative aspects of the modern world being the insane amount of animal suffering that is being heard in heaven, I would say, like
Yeah.
to bring it back to the spiritual thing. And yeah, I think I really to I guess put a capstone on that question. You know um there's a I think somehow, and I don't really know the history of thought well enough to say how exactly, but sometime in the last 500-600 years, the mentality shifted in terms of like what man's role on the planet is, and it went from the steward, the figure who watches over and cares for creation and um, orchestrates through agriculture and through other forms of land management, um, orchestrates the natural systems. And really that's the beautiful vision that I aspire towards on my own land management projects, and also hope that other people will embrace as well. And I really truly believe, even if it alienates some people, in talking about this stuff on a theological level, because that is the level that it's happening on, whether you like it or not. um and so anyway, um but the other thing I was going to say is that I lost my train of thought. What was I? What did I just say? I was talking about how um, wow, I completely spaced, completely
Well,
lost it.
it's getting late, like
It,
it happens to the rest of us, right?
it is
That's what
getting
I
a
love
little late.
about this podcast is that like, because I always telling to Ashley, Jason, it's kind of punk rock, and that like you come on this, it's going to be warts and all, right? Like lose your train of thought, maybe you'll get it
Yeah,
back, maybe you won't.
yeah.
Yeah, you were
But,
kind of talking about, the theological aspects of you know,
right, and I was saying that you know about stewardship versus
yeah, yeah,
at some point it shifted from a sort of more medieval kind of for you may not want to return with a V to medieval times, but you have to admit that like the land management and the and the sort of the stewardship mentality was better than it is now, which is really just a sort of this idea, I think, to present it as charitably as possible, is this idea that from a theological perspective, God put all of these natural resources here for us to use, um, and therefore we should there's no reason we shouldn't just exploit them, you know to to our wits end. And my rebuttal to that, and obviously you see that whether it's actually theologically grounded or not, writ large across many industries, especially natural resource industries, but obviously agriculture, mining, timber, etc. um, and I think that my rebuttal to that is that God also gave us human reason and intellect and the ability to um, self-govern, on an individual level and regulate our, what we would probably now call our levels of consumption, um, whether that's like in terms of like what we eat and buy, but also in other forms as well.
Mhm.
And and that's actually he gave us that gift, so that we may manage those resources, those other gifts, with you know dignity, for the rest of creation, and in order to bring about flourishing and thriving. And so, we were talking about the pond thing, like the pond building thing would be an intensive use of like fossil fuels and fossil fuel energy and all sorts of modern mechanical interventions would be necessary. But I think that that's a good use of those resources, because um, it's a one-time intervention that then creates centuries, if not more, of to- totally landscape altering benefits that
Mhm.
just increase productivity and harness the power of that most limiting reagent of resources, which is water. um but another example would be, this is another thing that Joel Salatin talks about. But how about, instead of using fossil fuel to ship, lettuce and cucumbers and celery from California all across the country, we use that petroleum to manufacture more greenhouse plastic, so that we could just grow them in places where there's winter. um, you know, uh, like, that's an example of, I think there's obviously even better ways to do that, which would just be like, altering our diets to eat more seasonally, so that we're eating roots and stuff in the winter, and eating leafy greens, and all. Obviously you can still eat leafy greens in the winter in certain places and under certain types of management, but a lot of that does involve greenhouse plastic, actually. But you know um like, there's just different ways you can manage these resources.
Mhm.
And Basically, I think, by and large, what we've done is sort of just allowed ourselves on a societal level to lapse into um, just sort of binging on them and using them to satisfy our various disordered um, desires, that we don't actually need.
Mhm.
And basically just have, and this is another thing that our friend Anarcho Contrarian talks about a lot, which is that we used to be a society of producers, where we actually made stuff, and people kind of had like just basic competences, and we've become, through this in many ways, through the sort of abundant availability of cheap energy, but also other forms of cheap this and that.
Mhm.
um, we've become consumers, a society of consumers, and we just guzzle things down, rather than, if you you can sit inside and eat fast food all day and watch Netflix with the heat running in the winter, or you could go outside and do something productive and get your body moving, and just have on an insulated jacket and produce the heat yourself.
Mhm.
It's something that I think about all the time, especially when I'm working in the winter. I'm like, I'm perfectly warm because I'm moving, and it gets pretty cold here. It gets down to 0. Rarely gets, overnight. Sometimes we'll get 10 below, but usually not like far north levels of 20 or 30 below here. But it can get pretty cold, and I just, um, I'm just thinking to myself, like, I am a furnace right now, and I'm fueled by the calories that I ate in the form of like sourdough bread or homegrown potatoes, rather than fossil fuels. That's the energy source that's generating the heat, and through my body, rather than natural gas or oil or whatever kind of heat you may have in your house or wherever else.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, just that idea of the management of resources, as sort of the, it's, I feel like management is, I think stewardship is actually a better word. The stewardship of resources, including the human resource, including including especially the domesticated animal resource, um, is what humans are here to do. Um, and not everyone has to be a farmer or an agriculturalist in some sense, but I do think that another backwards thing about modern society is that agriculture is just like kind of one um, you know commercial economic sector among many. It's no longer the economic foundation of a given region or locality or nation. um, when a lot of what my vision involves is actually making it that again, not only because that's just, I think, in the long run economically sustainable, but also it undergirds like a sense of human solidarity across a community, and just gives people a spiritual sense that through not even through necessarily their not even through their direct action, but actually through that consumption in which we all participate, which is eating.
Mhm.
We are actually having a beneficial impact on not just the planet, but our local soils. We're rather than it going towards the degradation of soils and ecosystems and human livelihoods, like it is now. Every time you take a bite of industrial food, which I know not everyone has access to better options, but the fact of the matter is that every time you take a bite of that type of food, you are sadly contributing to um, bad effects.
Mhm.
But that doesn't have to be that way. That you can actually, every bite that everyone takes could be from food that is produced in a way that builds soil, that provides good and right livelihoods to people, and that uh, provides for the thriving of the larger natural ecosystems. And so that's really what my vision boils down to. And I just know from my own experience that that's completely possible, and the current system is just unnecessary.
Yeah. Yeah. The current system is filled with so much waste
Right.
that it's sort of, an astounding claim that any of these things that you've laid out, or that you lay out oftentimes in your threads, are even difficult. Like if you think
Mhm.
about like the amount of complexity and difficulty in building, a highway overpass that takes up the equivalent of like 50 acres
Right.
basically, and you're like,
Yeah.
the complexity of building that, maintaining it, and then the sheer societal costs, right, as
Mhm.
well as like the cost to the biome in erecting that thing. And then in 20 years you got to like basically completely rebuild it because you need to maintain it, right? So it's a
Right.
cost outlay that never goes away. um it's just incredible hubris. I would say that I feel like there was a sort of Rubicon crossed in the late 1700s, early 1800s, when we decided that like sending men into the ground to die among coal dust,
Right.
in order to enrich people and pull people from the land so that they could, destroy their fingers making wool for people in the other, I think like, to me it's pretty clear, like the Enlightenment was seemed like an amazing epiphany at the time, but very quickly by the late 1700s and early 1800s became just a horror show. And it's the horror show that ultimately led to modernity, right? You have the horrors of slavery in the Americas, right, which fed the
Mhm.
horrors of industrialization in Britain, and the horrors of coal mining, right? Like just one of the
Mhm.
most frankly horrific things. I mean, it like is it sounds like hell itself, right? Like when you it's like Dante's description of hell sounds like a coal mine, you know
Yep.
in some respects it's actually maybe a step up from a coal mine, as some depends on what ring of hell you're in. um and I just that's when it, we turned there, right? Like at that point, it was like all bets were off. Anything was possible. You could enslave people in an industrial fashion. If you could force people to go into the ground and die underground and get black lung by the time they're 35 to feed this system, virtually anything's on the table then, right? And I feel like that, that was a big turn. And it's hard to say, right? Because it's like, you know, lords worked their peasants to death too, in the Middle Ages. Like there's always been plenty of terribleness whenever you have hierarchical systems of power, right?
Yeah.
But it certainly seems like being 1 degree removed from your food, or at least a large portion of your food, seems like a desirable path to get to. And that's something that your 1 out of 10 thread was really kind of highlighting, that like it puts people closer to the food. You want to decarbonize your food, make sure it all comes from within 20 miles of you, like, because most of the carbon that goes into your lifestyle, a lot of that carbon is just because we're shipping food all over the damn planet before it arrives at your dining room table.
Yep.
I wanted to kind of like bring it completely full circle to the thread we started with talking about, is that I do find there's a certain irony. You kind of mentioned the poodles, right? And the small yappy dogs. I think there's an irony in people saying or envisioning, right, that the toil necessary to be an urban farmer or to be a small scale farmer is significantly worse than the toil they're putting into maintaining their dogs or their cats on a daily basis, right? They justify it. I mean, I see it, right? Like, so I have a cat, right? I just have a cat. And I love the guy. Like I legitimately enjoy his company, right? And so I don't view what I have to do for his upkeep. This is a two-way street. We are both giving something to each other. It is a relationship, right? And I am endlessly fascinated by the fact that he's fundamentally an alien creature that I will never understand. We have this relationship, we clearly do, but I have no idea what that thing is thinking at any given time. And, but, that we imagine, right, that there's something more to it. But, you just tweeted kind of, I think it might've been kind of a kiss off, right, to all the blue checks from your thread, but just sort of being like, I just went out and I did all my farm I did all my farm stuff in 2 hours, and now I'm here on Twitter enjoying myself. Like,
totally.
I think that feeling that like, there's like no, it's binary, right? You're like either this like urbane, like cosmopolitan, ideal worker, right? Or
a slave.
or you're a slave, right? Or you're working your ass off at your subsistence farmer, in the Dust Bowl. And it's like, that's
I have a hot take there. This may be controversial, but I do think, we're all aware of the constant reduction of every, historical event to something related to World War II, because that's like the only historical event that the average American student actually like retains any knowledge about. And I actually had sort of this idea pop into my head that when like the blue check hears about like gardening, their mind goes directly to chattel slavery, or just like outdoor agricultural labor. That's like the first association that they have to it. They don't have this, they don't see the pictures of that I retweeted, probably more than 100 of from people, in the aftermath of that thread, of people posting their homesteads and just like, beautiful scenes of children and livestock. There was another kid who came on and you probably saw this. It was like some sort of he posted a picture of kind of like an industrial farm with a bunch of like heavy duty implements, and was like, "This is what a real farm looks like." And first of all, like, no, it's not. Second of all, like, what do you mean by a real farm? And so I just responded to that with like a couple pictures, a couple idyllic pictures of like my cows and stuff. Like, this is what a real farm looks like. And we got like tons of responses to that. And it was awesome. And I retweeted all of them. And it was just like, yeah, like, it's not like picking cotton. Not that I want to be like insensitive or whatever, but I just really do think that people are just undereducated, or yeah, if not chattel slavery, certainly the Dust Bowl. This
Mhm.
idea of just like going broke, trying to grow wheat and being utterly reliant on the rain that's not coming. um,
Yeah, and
that's not what
also
we're talking about.
that was that both of those systems, right?
Mhm.
The worst excesses of agricultural like despondency, if you will, right,
Mhm.
were both really functions of a global system of abuse,
Mhm.
right? Like none of those things were agriculture, right? I mean, there's a reason we
Mhm.
call it agriculture, is it is a culture around the growing of food and
Mhm.
around all of the relationships that occur because of that.
Mhm.
And I think like I mean, modern agriculture is not agriculture. It is factory farming, I think, is the best
Mhm.
term for it.
Extraction, yeah.
It is not what, and that original poster guy, like he wasn't wrong, right? That is a dominant form of farming, right? But that's not what you're talking about. That's not what any of these homesteaders are talking about, and that's not what most doomer optimists are talking about. We don't want to be there now. We don't want to go to a greater version of that, which is largely what everyone refers to as the bug men, right?
Right.
That's the vision, right? Is that they gussy it up with like a lot of really shiny chrome and plastic and glass and lots of green, and look at how great this will be. But it's just a shinier version of the factory farming system. And it doesn't solve anything, because in the end we have got to get right with the earth, or we will not be able to do any of these things that we want to do, and as a species. And I don't know, I think like I think we're heading there. I mean, I think that there's a lot of people opting out voluntarily. I think someone had kind of mentioned that, like, you're probably getting close to that 1 in 10 households actually do have chickens.
Yeah, Wrath of
Like,
Non. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I
like
mean, it
we're
actually
actually
already
probably getting
is.
pretty darn close to that.
Yeah, yeah. They
I
just
think
don't
like,
raise 35. They average like less than 10, I think. They
yeah,
could
yeah.
easily
So
raise 35.
yeah, and I can tell you that there are heartening signs here from the depths of blue urban areas. There are a lot of people starting to voluntarily tear up their lawns and planting, if not raised bed gardens, then actually, like, you know trying their hand at permaculture, and
Mhm.
just like being like, I'm going to make a native pollinator yard. you
Mhm.
know
Yeah, that's awesome.
it's very heartening. Like, it is a movement, and it's cross all sections of society, right? It does there's it crosses racial lines, it crosses generational lines, it crosses class divisions, right?
Mhm.
People are very interested in this idea, and I think that one of the things that your original thread kind of highlighted is that, and I say this to Ashley and Jason a lot too, that I think it's about putting forward a positive vision of the future, because what we have right now is this kind of paucity of vision, right? We have like this kind of solar punk, like techno utopian view of chrome everywhere, right? And then we
Mhm.
have this view of nuclear holocaust. We're all serfs in this global bugman society, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And um, none of that is going to be real. That is not the future. I don't believe either of those are the future. We rarely predict very well
Mhm.
as a species. Like, we go where the future takes us, right? I can't imagine how many like science fiction writers are sort of like, well, damn it, Putin, like, you just totally screwed up my near future science fiction, right? And COVID, like, I mean, everyone who wrote something before 2019, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's all, you chuck it out the window, right? Because this thing came in and changed the whole trajectory of things.
Mhm.
I believe that we're heading into a sort of renaissance. I don't know if it'll be enough. That's where my doomer part comes in, is I don't know if it'll be enough. I don't know if we have enough people. There certainly are a lot of uh, there's a lot of money and a lot of influence behind this kind of techno, utilitarian vision of the future,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, but there's a lot of people opting out, and it really is a perfect kind of antidote to it, because if you're not plugged into the system, you really can't be managed or monitored or counted, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, we're still in a space where you sort to sort of volunteer yourself a little bit to be part of that. And of course, here we are on Zoom having this discussion, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like things are turning. I feel like, for all the people that quote unquote dunked on you for that thread, there are a lot of people that found it as reasonable as I did,
Yeah.
and were
Oh, it
like,
was nowhere near a ratio. I mean,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it was like 15,000 likes. I think I got up to 16,000 over time. But
Wow.
yeah, and I don't know. There were a couple thousand quote tweets, which are usually considered, and a couple thousand comments, which are usually the ratio. But yeah, the vast majority. And like I said, for the first day, everybody was just like, "Yeah, this is so cool!" Like, and here are my chickens. I'm doing my part. Like a lot of like immediate. I mean, I knew it was gonna blow up because like it just took off, way faster than any other tweet I had ever
Yeah.
posted. Like I think I put my phone down and like went to the bathroom or something and came back, and like 2 minutes later it had already had like 100 likes, and I was like, oh god, here we go.
Yeah.
And but I wasn't worried at that point. I was just like, this is cool. Like all my friends are into this. You know, um, and yeah. Well, I would say in terms of like what that like the sort of willingness to adopt something different. I think people are definitely there. I think, yeah, especially as technology, as we're seeing, regardless of whether you agree with what's going on in with the trucker convoy in Canada, the way that technology is being used to crush the sort of dissent um, is is really, to use the Twitter expression, blackpilling. I think, and kind of probably waking, it's a wake up call to a lot of people, which is that yeah, all of this technology that we've been sort of seduced into as a way of making life easier, making making life more convenient, making it more pleasurable, etc. They're going to start using it against us in different ways, especially
Mhm.
if we as both left and right do, if we have kind of complaints and what's the word, things that we'd like to improve on in society that maybe don't involve that degree of technology. And so I think, yeah, you're going to start seeing more and more of this, and also especially with at least the generations that haven't been raised fully in the digital world. Um, well, to my sort of cynical tinfoil hat take is just that, you know, as with a lot of things, a lot of these technological products, such as the metaverse, there's an initial reticence, and in different ways they have to kind of manufacture the demand for it. And I
Mhm.
think, I'm not saying this is like deliberately coordinated, but a great way to manufacture demand for the metaverse would be to make like real life shitty and miserable. And they've done a great job of that through the pandemic. Just isolating people, making them afraid of each other, making certainly for school children who have to be either on the computer or socially distanced and wearing masks and not allowed to sit next to each other at lunch and all that sort of thing. It's just like, yeah, like life is hell. So like the metaverse sounds great, and we already have that. That's why people resort to social media and
Mhm.
other forms of kind of escapism through technology. But there's actually another way to combat like the misery of the modern world in all of its forms, which is to engage with what's left of the natural world, and in any way that you can, whether you have land or not, whether you're wealthy or not, there are ways to do it. And so that's kind of the white pill, is that that we already have the alternative to the metaverse. We know we get that modern life kind of sucks, and it's being marketed to us as though the metaverse is the only way out of it, but actually there's another way. And I think more and more people are, I agree with you, are coming around to that realization, and seeking out ways that they can, you know, engage with instead, just the universe rather than the metaverse.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's cool. And yeah, and that was really what my thread was about, is just, just getting people to think about ways that they might, and obviously agriculture is the first and most basic way, of growing your own food. But there's lots of ways that you can do what I'm talking about. It doesn't have to be as a gardener or a micro farmer in any way. You can do it. I'm just talking about it, engaging with natural materials, using your hands, being productive and creative in some way, and just as a hobby. I'm not even saying to quit your day job, but that sort of thing. And a lot of people have these hobbies like this, but encouraging more people to do that, and encouraging the people that do it already to do it more, and share it with other people is
Mhm.
really what my message is.
Yeah.
Pretty simple at the end of the
Yeah.
day.
I mean, it's just re-engaging in the world. I mean,
Mhm.
roots down. I mean, the it's horrible to say this, but like the reaction to COVID proved to be a real boon for our business model, because so many people were looking for things to do outside. As soon as we realized that, like, outside, you're fine outside, right? Generally speaking.
Right.
And we're like, what can we do outside? And it's like, okay, well, getting outside and gardening and doing stuff at the, you can't go in the library, right? But we can go to this garden that we've built at the library, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
um, it was a real, like, oh wow, we've completely like um ignored and neglected the outside spaces of all these public buildings,
Right.
and now we're stuck, like we have these like stranded assets, right, that we can't
Hmm.
use.
Hmm.
How about we start looking at how we can change the outside? And
Hmm.
we were sort of like in the right space at the right time to be like, well, you could use it for food forestry and
Hmm.
native pollinators and youth education and grow this new class of green jobs.
Hmm.
All these things that we say as a society we want, but
Hmm.
when push comes to shove, we fund a new highway instead. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
so well, this has been really tremendous, William. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time this evening.
Yeah, I had a great time. This was a great chat, and I'm looking forward to listening to it back. I hope that other people will have gotten something out of it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
What a pleasure.